we're glad to have you guys both with us. Jay Warner and Jimmy Wallace, Jim and Jimmy. And I'm excited about hearing about this new book, Case Files, Murder and Meaning. You guys tell us about that. Let's dive right in. Tell us about this new graphic novel that you guys have worked on together.
Well, I'll jump in first. I think, yeah, so for us, most of my stuff's always been nonfiction, but I always hoped someday to do fiction. Didn't think it would probably look like this. But it turns out that I think I'm probably better at helping someone do the overarching story than I might be in the details. Jimmy is really good in the details, and he can like flesh out the characters after we've kind of like talked about, and he's just got a great imagination. Also, he's an avid comic book reader. So when this opportunity came up from our publisher, who just happened to purchase a comic book, small comic book company that they wanted to expand their catalog in this area, we thought, oh, this is a great opportunity for us because I can do some fiction, and Jimmy can exercise this muscle that he's had from reading all those books in those boxes behind you, right? Like if you're somebody who's that avid of a comic book reader, you're probably going to end up being a pretty good comic book writer. And so we got a chance to do both, and then we got a chance to work together, which we'd done for a while at our website. You know, we'd done podcasts together. Jimmy had contributed articles to the website, so we already kind of knew where we wanted to go. And so I think that's what. And I don't know what he'll say about it, but I know that's, I was really, when I first saw the opportunity, I was like, we got to strike on this right now, because we don't even know how long, you don't know how long people are going to be in the comic book business, especially when you're a publisher who maybe doesn't have, now look, David C. Cook has a lot of bandwidth, and Jimmy can tell you the history of David C. Cook and comics. But for me, it felt like a very new genre, and I wasn't sure how long we would get a chance to work in it. So I was glad to jump in.
So graphic novel is code for comic book. That's what I'm hearing.
Essentially,
yes.
Yes.
Are they synonymous?
Technically speaking, I think that there would be a difference, but the difference would mostly be in format rather than like the contents. Normally when you think of a comic book, you think of something that's released monthly or just one single time. It's got like it's got maybe cheaper paper. It's only about 20 pages. It's bound by staples. And graphic novels, you're just thinking about something that's more bound like a book. It's typically longer. This is 160 pages versus the 20 pages of a normal monthly comic book. So, but in terms of what's actually on the page, it's all comics.
Gotcha. Okay, man, this is cool. I'm learning. I was never a comic book guy. I don't know why. I somehow just missed that wave. I didn't catch it or something. I didn't get into comic books, but now I'm starting to really reconsider my life, and I'm definitely getting more into this. Let me ask you this. I know like this is like totally not even the main point, right? There's all kinds of good content to discuss, but the illustrations, that's like the thing that I see, right? That's the big, first kind of impression. Do you guys, how do you do those? Do you guys do those? Do you hire out? How do you get your vision of this image into the book?
Yeah, I think you zeroed in on a very important point of this whole creative process, which is the art is essentially the most important part of any comic or graphic novel, because it's the lens through which you see the entire story. So for us, we did not do the art; we provided a script. And when we first wrote the first version of the script, we didn't even know what artist might be attached to the project. So we wrote almost like what you think of. Maybe like a screenplay or something like that. It was essentially a breakdown. Hey, on page 1, this is what's going to happen. Page 2, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, we were really blessed to work with these two artists, Steve Crespo and Dario Formasani, who really took the ideas of the script and then translated them into the art. And the artists are not only are they telling the story with us, but they're designing what the characters look like. They're showing the way the characters act and emote. They're designing the sets, choosing the lighting of a scene, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot that rests on the artist, and I think if you read a portion of the comic and you're like, wow, that was really cool, it's probably more thanks to their input than ours. So we were very lucky to work with them.
Man, that's yeah. I can imagine that process and how a blessing it would be to find an artist that boom gets your vision, gets that understanding for the emotions you're going for and all that. Because man, yeah, what a back and forth that could be. So let's talk about the content. Murder and meaning. What is this? What's this new book about?
Well, we wanted to kind of stay within our lane of making a case for the Christian worldview from a detective's perspective. And what that really meant for us was, okay, so if we tell this story, this is a story about a serial killer in Los Angeles County and a team of detectives that's trying to catch him. And we thought, well, okay, so what can we? What is one aspect of Christian theology or Christian worldview that would be best kind of explored in this format? Well, there's tons, but we decided in this first book to really focus on the issue of how do we ground value in human dignity? How do we, like some murders don't even get televised, don't even get broadcast, don't even get written up. Other murders make national headlines because apparently that victim appears to be more culturally relevant than the other. Well, is that how we're going to ground value in humans, based on how famous they are or how much they've achieved or how much money they have or what race they are? I mean, how do we ground human value? And the Christian worldview has something to say about that. So we wanted to explore that. So we've got a serial killer who is just increasing the stakes with every murder by picking someone in Los Angeles County who he thinks, or who he thinks the culture thinks, has more value. So the first murder, and listen, detectives are also reflect this kind of misplaced, where do you put your identity? Where do you put your meaning and value? We do this all the time, because if you're on a homicide team and a celebrity gets killed, well, the five guys on the team, everyone wants that case.
Yeah.
They want that case. Well, why? Because they think that somehow their work is going to be elevated because their victim is of more significance than somebody who they really is any victim of more significance. Well, only if you're grounding your human value in something other than the Christian worldview. So we wanted to explore that. Jimmy's done a great job of foreshadowing and kind of teasing out how each character is also struggling with his own value, like what makes us valuable. And even the value in culture, he's kind of teasing out along the way. But you'll see that so this is a book that you'll probably read halfway through and not even realize it's a Christian book. Because some of these things are just cultural issues that we all have to wrestle with, regardless of your worldview. And then at some point, you'll see that we're going to at least provide another alternative to worldview, which is a Christian worldview. But our major characters, for example, are not Christians. Like any homicide team, you're probably going to be populated mostly by people who aren't believers, and the people who are believers are probably going to be minimized in some way by the other folks. So that's true in this book also. That's just the way it is in most homicide teams. And we try to be really realistic. But I want to go back to something that Jimmy said that I just thought about today, because it is an important difference when we're talking about, is this a comic book? Well, there is a difference in the terms of it's. I think that sometimes people think about graphic novels and they think, well, this is just a comic book. But you're right about how comic books are published. They are published to be the least expensive format of publishing possible. I mean, if you could get away with just black and white, they probably would. But if you're going to do a color comic, it's almost always on newsprint or something that's of lesser. I don't know if that's true anymore, but it used to be when I was a kid that's what you would expect to see. Almost like newspaper kind of quality paper. I think it's probably getting better. But this book is bound on glossy, thick paper. I mean, it just feels to me, I was surprised. I was kind of expecting something. Like we write this and we're watching the panels and we're having to back and forth with the artist. We can see what it's going to look like. We get a digital copy of it. But I was really not prepared for what we ended up holding in our hands. Like the digital version of this does not do justice to what this feels like in your hands. So it turns out, I don't know if every graphic novel is this way, but I think David C. Cook did a great job of producing what really is a collectible that you hold in your hand. It feels like a gift you want to give someone as soon as I was surprised by that. I don't think my other books necessarily feel that way. But this book does. It feels like it's on shiny paper, and the cover is thick and several different textures. It feels just really different from a comic book in that sense.
You're making me want to hold a book in my hands right now. There is. This is something that nobody ever talks about, but there's a distinct feel difference between different books. And some books, like for example, I just ordered a couple weeks ago, last week actually, I just ordered a new Bible, and I'm looking forward to it arriving because of the feel, right? Like so many Bibles are printed, on the thinnest pages possible. It's hard to turn just one. You try to turn a page and you turn 10 of them. And then you talk about comic books. When you say that, like, we can kind of all feel in our mind like what that page is like, and a thin Bible page and then a thick glossy page. And there really is something to the attractiveness of like that tactile part of a book, which is why some people, myself included, even though I've read a lot of books on Kindles and on my iPhone, I've read books on my phone. It's a very different experience, and it feels more like work. It feels kind of like you're trying to get something accomplished and check it off, rather than
enjoying a book,
enjoying the journey of the book.
Yes.
Right?
So how, Dave? Let me ask you on the side. How did you know that this Bible you ordered was going to feel differently?
Yeah, just, I guess, the way they described it, right?
Okay,
like
so
the way you just described it.
Well, and this is where I discovered that, typically we talk about books, like this is a book and it's got a robust story. You could have written it in paragraph form. Forget about the images. It could have just been a novel. So this is the kind of book this is. And when I talk about a book, typically you talk about ideas. What's the idea of your book? What's the topic of your book? It's about concepts, topics, ideas. This isn't just that. This is a lot more than that. This is about an experience you have when you get into a visual story and you turn these glossy pages. It's an experience. And I've never had to describe a book that way. And when I realized that I think Jimmy and I both realized it, we were at a conference together and we gave a copy of the book to a friend of ours, and he received it and he said, "Ooh." And I thought, where's that coming from? That ooh, no one's ever done that with any book I've ever given them. Okay?
I was getting ready to say that's not a not a typical book reaction.
Yeah. So I thought, see, this it's not just that there's an idea in these pages. It's that the pages themselves seem like there's something. So it's hard to explain that, and it's hard to kind of get that out to people, but it is different than the usual experience for sure.
So I'm wondering something right now, and before I wonder it aloud, I want to ask Jimmy, as an avid comic book guy, if I can call you a comic book guy, do you enjoy reading books that are non-graphic novels, non-comic books?
Yes, I do. Pardon me. Yes, I've just always been an avid reader. I grew up with two parents who just loved to voraciously read, and my dad, everyone is aware of him from his nonfiction work, but my mom is a huge reader as well, and she, I think, read more probably the fiction side of the family. And so I grew up reading regular books, quote unquote regular, but then I also grew up reading comics, and I think probably the pressures of time mean that with a full-time job and a family and stuff, sometimes it's easier to get through a 20-page comic and feel like, hey, I got through that portion of the story, I got through the chapter, versus I've read the same first page of my regular book 5 times, because every time I pick it up, I'm getting interrupted. When my daughter was, my 2-year-old daughter was born a couple years ago, I had a book. It was a very short book, like a 100-page old Pulp Fiction book from like the 70s. I was like, oh, this will be easy. It's not even that long. This will be my beach read for the summer. And I never got through. I got like 30 pages in for the whole summer, just because of every time I'd sit down to read, the baby would wake up again or whatever. So I just probably the pressures of time have made it a little easier to stick to comics versus other books lately in my life. But I just love all types of stories. And I think for me, I approach my faith through an apologetic lens. So the intellectual side, if you want to call it that, of faith is big for me, and I love nonfiction. But when I'm reading nonfiction, it is an intellectual pursuit. It's something that I'm assessing with my mind. And when I'm reading fiction, I'm experiencing, or I'm taking in information through all my other senses. And so I just think it hits different. And so I want to have a good balance of both. But for me, fiction has always been very moving and something that I enjoy. Like, that's what I look forward to the most. If I have some free time, I want to read fiction.
That's really neat. And I think I'm imagining here, I wonder if there's ever been any studies done on this. I'm imagining that a graphic novel might hold the attention better of a reader with ADD. I wonder if anybody's ever done any research on this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I don't know how you feel about this, Jimmy, but I think that there is a difference. I'm still fascinated by what you're saying, though, Jimmy, about this fiction nonfiction divide, because I also I'm drawn in my leisure time toward fiction. Like I would, why is that the case? I mean, not everyone probably is. I mean, I think documentaries are incredibly popular on Netflix, but maybe they're the most popular. I don't know, but I know for me, maybe it's because I'm constantly working in the realm of nonfiction. Like I'm making this case, it's nonfiction. Even my work life was about writing long reports about the evidence for this. That when I wanted to relax, I just wanted to unplug from the nonfiction world and just plug. But then now as I get older, I don't know how Jimmy feels about this yet, but you will, Jimmy. At some point, I got older and I thought, man, I don't have a lot of time to waste though. Like I still want to write stuff that is nonfiction oriented, and I still have another book I'm working on right now, and I think I could spend the time researching for that book, or relaxing and bathing in fiction, and I'm running out of time, so I find myself watching fiction less and less, like movies. Like I'm always now watching something to learn, because I'm trying to write the next thing. I think you can lose. I think you have to have a good balance of both. And that's why I hope our catalog in the end, when we're all said and done, C.S. Lewis's catalog in the end was about as robust from nonfiction and fiction side as it could possibly be. In this generation, I just think that fiction is going to be visual. I've always tried to make my nonfiction as visual as possible. I just do my own illustrations in my books. So here, I think this is the good future for us, is to stay in this lane.
You know, first of all, before I move on, when you brought up C.S. Lewis, I was just thinking of the quote from him. I'm pretty sure this is a Lewis quote. He said, "One day you will be old enough, or one day I hope to be old enough to read fairy tales again." I think he told this to somebody, you know, who was kind of disparaging the fiction work, right? He said, "Don't worry, one day you'll be old enough to read fairy tales again." And I love that because, I mean, so I'm 46. And I definitely, when I was in my 20s and working on my master's degree and reading nothing but nonfiction, I kind of turned my nose up at people who were reading fiction, right? And now I'm totally not that anymore. Now I love a good piece of fiction, and I think you said the key word there is relaxing, right? And there's that balance. When I read fiction, it's like I'm using a different part of my brain almost. It's like there's a totally different feel. There's a different vibe. It's more of I'm kind of leaned back, more relaxed, and letting the story come to me than like lean forward like I'm digging through this book and mining for, you know, nuggets. It's just kind of like, hey, just sit back and enjoy this great story.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the problem. You tell me, Jimmy, if you see this too. And you and I have never actually talked about this, but I think this is sometimes the problem with Christian fiction, is that we know that there is this information that's nonfiction. It's called the gospel, okay? And we want this nonfiction nugget to be the main thing. We want to, this Great Commission stuff. You know, we want to preach the gospel. Yet we know we have this fictional account, which is often just a ride we're taking you on. So how do you balance the nonfiction ride the fictional ride with the nonfiction piece, which is the gospel? And this is, I think sometimes you'll see this in Christian fiction where the balance isn't very great, and people will prioritize the nonfiction gospel over the fictional account. It's almost like the fictional account is just there to serve. It's just there to kind of get you interested. So, because we really want to do is preach the gospel, which I get. And so I don't know. We've not taken that approach with this book. We thought just the opposite. This is fiction, but it does have a meaning. It does have purpose. This book will hopefully, but I think in the end, if you can read through the whole thing and say that was really a good read, a fast read, as a page turner, and at the same time we did something to advance the ball from a Christian worldview, I think we felt that was enough. We have to be less ambitious.
Less ambitious is a key line there. I feel like there's some Greg Kokel going on here too, about, you know, so many of those older Christian fiction novels that you're alluding to. It was like they felt like their goal was to hit a grand slam and get you over the goal line, to mix metaphors there. Yeah. But if you make it your goal just to move the ball forward, much less ambitious, much more relaxing, and probably more of a subtle plot line moving as well. Like you said, I always would agree, reading Christian fiction, I feel like I already know the hook before I start the book, right? Like, oh, it's Christian fiction. I already know where this is going, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, how many people, Jimmy, have told you that this feels like it surprised them how it ended?
Yeah, I do think that people expected when they knew it was a Christian product that at the end everybody's like wearing crosses around their necks or on their knees praying or something very like something big. Every person was going to be like have totally repented of their sins and have figured it out and they have all the answers and stuff like that. And we definitely didn't want to do that. Where I think I feel conflicted when I think about other Christian fiction because there is some that I have not enjoyed or maybe I thought was not the greatest, but there's also Christian fiction that I really loved because of how much it leaned into the preachiness of it. If anyone's familiar with Christian comics, they've probably heard of these Archie comics that were made that were Christian Archie comics by Spire Christian Comics, and they're extremely, I would say, cheesy or corny.
I've heard of Archie. I haven't heard of the Christian Archies.
So the Archie Comics guy, he let one of his artists, who is a devout Christian, produce his own independent comics using the Archie characters for a while. I think they did it for like 10 years or something like that. I forget. But
when I think about how that idea of cheesy, like we use that word, right, Jimmy? We use this word cheesy sometimes. And what we really mean is, and I think people hear that and they think, oh, these guys think they aren't cheesy. No, we're all, look, if what we really mean is that how willing are we to bend our knee to the culture, which is not godly? And how willing are we to be holy? Think about it, to be set apart. And sometimes people look at the set apartness of Christian fiction and they think, oh, it's cheesy. It's not worldly. It's almost like cheesy is an antonym for worldly. And so I think that or maybe it's too simplistic. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what do we mean when we say cheesy, right? But that's what it is. It's too simplistic, and it doesn't feel like it resonates with the it's like it's Pollyannish almost. Mm-hmm. Cheesy could be like another way of saying Pollyannish. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but I just think that
I think you're hitting on something here with the Pollyannish part. I think, and this goes to something Jimmy was saying earlier about where everybody's confessing their sins and praying at the end of the book. I think when I think cheesy, I think unrealistic, right? Like, this is not how it would actually be in real life. This is probably not how this story would actually go in real life, and therefore it's cheesy. And I think if you can make your fiction at least realistic enough that people can feel like, yeah, that's, you kind of lose them the minute it goes something so outlandish happens that they're like, oh, come on, that would never happen.
Yeah.
You kind of lose the reader. But as long as it's like, this is probably exactly how this would go down.
Well, I can tell you, I think that Jimmy's done a good job then. And that's a good point. That is what cheesy really means if you think about it. And I think he's done a good job of this book feels very realistic. The conversations. And in the end, it's going to be unsatisfying to people who want it to be a little more cheesy or a little more, goal-driven to the end where everyone's going to get saved. That's not going to happen.
You're always going to disappoint somebody.
Yeah, you always are. But I thought that Jimmy's conversations felt very realistic. And what's also good about it is he's had a chance to listen to conversations, police officer conversations, since he was a young kid. Because that was my dad and I talking about our cases over the years, comparing his generation of law enforcement to my generation of law enforcement. And he would listen to those conversations at dinner or whenever we were together. But what's great about this book is that I noticed that like this has got the echo of conversations I've had with all of my partners over the years, but the language has changed because it's reflecting Jimmy's generation of police officers and how the same themes, but it's clearly not my generation of language, it's his, which I think is pretty cool to see that at the end of it all.
That's really interesting. I can see that, and I wanted to ask Jimmy, what was it like growing up? What was it like growing up in the house of the J. Warner Wallace, and also second part of that is like, how did you come to faith in Christ? Tell us a little bit of your story and your growing up.
It was extremely corny and extremely cheesy. No, just to finish my thought on that earlier one was just to say that I actually admire the quote unquote corniness or cheesiness or whatever we want to say of some of this Christian fiction, because these Christians creators are so bold as to not be intimidated by the culture to say, hey, don't say it your way, don't say what you want to say. So I don't know that was necessarily we had the same approach as some of these past creators when we did this story, but I think what I didn't want to do was go so far the other direction that we didn't have that same boldness to say what we really wanted to say about God, what we really knew was true about the world with our story. Now, going back to growing up with J. Warner Wallace, I was like 8. Actually, I think I was 7 or 8. I was thinking about this. I've been saying 8 or 9 and some recently, but I think I was 7 or 8 years old when my dad came to faith. So I do have pretty good memories of him as a new Christian. And one of my strongest memories is just sitting around the dinner table and listening to him and his friends vigorously argue over dinner over all kinds of Christian theology. And he was a new Christian, and so the questions were, a lot of foundational questions about how are you saved? What's the relationship between God's will and man's will? Whatever little minutia that you could get to. My dad was like, his personality, he wants to go as deep as possible, as quickly as possible. And he would have all these new Christian friends who had met at church come over, and they already, maybe they had an opinion or maybe they didn't. And these guys would be like at each other's throats arguing on theological concepts. But I loved it. As a kid, I ate that up. I came to kind of view Christianity as, this is this thing that you take very seriously. It asks really deep questions about life, and it's very important that you figure out the answer. And so I loved that. It made me want to be like that and ask these important questions and be able to effectively argue in a way that I would have, if I was in the conversation, I could have held my own. Now I was 7 or 8, so at that time I wasn't ready, but that was kind of like always in the back of my mind as a motivator. Hey, I want to one day have a faith like these guys.
Man, that's really unique. Coming into Christianity, viewing it as this is something that's very deep. This is something very serious. It's very intellectual. Is quite honestly, that's totally opposite of many kids' view of Christianity that grow up in a Christian home. And so I think you probably got it better and backwards from what most of us got who grew up in a Christian home of no questions. This is what we believe, and then we start using our intellects start getting engaged, somewhere around 18 to 22. So you had it very differently right from the get-go. So what's your story of your journey to Christ? When did that happen for you?
I think that was probably my story, was just kind of like through osmosis, just absorbing this very vigorous Christian life that suddenly had erupted around me as a kid. I don't know that I would say that there was like a turning point. I was a rebellious young kid. I rejected Christianity and did X, Y, and Z. And then suddenly had like a 180 in high school or college or et cetera, et cetera. I think I enjoyed the passion that I saw my parents have, and made me want to one day have that same passion. And I think that just grew in me over time. So I don't know that there was a time after that I didn't say that I was a Christian. And luckily here I am still standing strong in the faith. I think that the apologetic approach just really spoke to me personally. I really liked the intellectual kind of the puzzle, the challenge of trying to figure this all out that Christianity offered. And Christianity offers the best answers to every question. All the hardest questions in life, there may be other worldviews out there that offer an answer, but they're never as good or as satisfying as Christianity's.
I think part of it too, if you think about this, Dave, is that there's a sense in which we're looking for, and this is why I think Jimmy's like, was I 7? Was I 8? Was I 9? Because for me, it was a process. And so I have a hard time landing for you. Now, at some point, I think Jimmy would agree with this. At some point, you're like, okay, so I've examined all the evidence, but I still don't understand what is the gospel. You can examine all the evidence and have an intellectual assent to something and not be saved. You haven't given your life to it. You haven't trusted Christ as your Savior. You just know that Jesus is a Savior. That's totally two different things. Belief that versus belief in. And so I think at some point, I had to ask myself the question, Like, you have to know enough about yourself. Are you a sinner in need of a savior? Because if you don't think you're a sinner in need of a savior, then you just have intellectual assent about, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with the things in the New Testament, but I've not embraced Jesus as savior. And so for me, though, that was a process. And if Jimmy was along for that ride. So a lot of those conversations that he remembers me having were pre-Christian conversations. Like, I'm examining this and going, yeah, but what about this? And the only people I knew to ask were the people I was meeting at church, and a lot of them had not even examined it yet. They had given their life to Christ, but had no idea what the Scripture was teaching on those issues. That was interesting to me. I needed to go the other way. But at some point, both of us have to say, okay, look, these are the facts. They're true or they're false. When you finally get to the place where you don't know they're true, you have to make a decision. Are you willing now to bend your knee, to surrender your life to Jesus as Savior? And you're gonna know that because there'll be some fruit of that, right? So you'll see that in people's lives. People ask me all the time, how do I keep my kids in the faith? Well, I always tell them, it's not like I can give you these 5 steps. How about this? Be as excited about Jesus as your Savior as you are about your sports teams. If you do that, you will pass on, because you pass on your fanship. Here in California, we have all kinds of teams. We got 2 of everything: 2 football teams, 2 baseball, 2 hockey, 2 basketball. We got it all over here, okay? And there are people who are deeply divided on which side of these 2 they are aligned: Lakers or Clippers, Rams or Chargers, whatever it may be. And they can make a strong case for this, and they wear jerseys. They'll often wear their jerseys when they're not at a game. But they'll definitely make time in their schedule. They'll talk about this at dinner. That was us. But the thing we were talking about wasn't our fanship. It was what is true about Jesus. Like, who is he? What does this mean for our lives? How do we live this? What is the nature of humanity? We really, because I think most secular people would say we're innately good, but we've been corrupted by systems and families and governments. And if we can simply change the systems and families and governments, we can get to be even better. But the Christian worldview actually demonstrates your need for a savior. Like, you have to kind of like sort that out first.
Now you're getting to the root of everything right there, man.
Yeah,
Are we
right.
basically good or basically evil, right? And man, that's it. I was listening to a sermon that a friend sent me the other day from his church, and I think the pastor there said it really well. The difference between, and you said it, you saying, believe in versus believe that. And he was saying it's not an acknowledgement that Jesus is God. It's the acknowledgement that Jesus is my God. And he was making it personal, right?
And that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
It kind of gets back to that whole verse about, even Satan believes
Yes.
in God.
That's actually a great way to put it, Dave. That it's not that he's God, that he's
it's
my
not that
God.
he's
Mm-hmm.
the God. It's that he's my God. It's not that he's Lord. He's my Lord. And that's the distinction, is when you make it personal, and it's not just an intellectual acknowledgement that there is a God and that Jesus was God. It's like, Jesus is my Savior.
This is
and
interesting,
my Lord.
but don't you think it's interesting that people, like you just asked Jimmy, and I've often wondered this too, like, when did that happen for you? When did Jesus move from being God to your God? It's like most of us have been conditioned to say, there's got to be a moment when you can tell me this. There has to.
I'm not in that camp. I'm perfectly comfortable in the camp of the process.
Yeah.
The process camp.
Yeah. Okay. So that's me, and that's probably what happened to Jimmy.
I think about this like when I think about my kids. I mean, they're really young, and we're just barely, going through the steps of teaching what prayer is, who God is, what even is church. We go there, but what is it? I got 2 at 2 and younger, so that we're a long way away from talking about the substance of this. But I don't really want to raise my daughters in a environment where at some point, when they're 12 or when they're 15, I turn to them and say, "Hey, so are you going to be a Christian or not?" My expectation is that they will always have been Christians. I want it. I think that the onus is on me to raise them in such a way that they look back on their life and go, "I always was a Christian." It's not that at birth they understood what the Trinity was, but that there was never a time in which they did not have faith. And I think there's a aspect of faith that is speaks to allegiance. Yeah, it's not just something that you think is true, but it's something that you would give yourself to, that you have allegiance to this God. And so I don't. Yeah, I guess maybe this is just self-serving. I never had like a great dynamic conversion story where I was hooked on drugs and God saved my life, and you're going to be really impressed with my story. So maybe this is just self-serving. But Paul, I think it's Paul, talks about how he was saved, is being saved, and will be saved, and that it's this kind of like all the time sort of thing. And so I don't know if I have the expectation that my daughters are going to say yes on June 1st, 2031, I was saved. Like they should have always been Christians if I did my job well. I mean, I can't control all of it, but I'm going to do my best to create an environment where they can kind of say that.
Hey, men. Thrivent is proud to support Men's Alliance's goals, and financial advisor Dr. Andrew Newman, call sign Sage, is excited to help tribe members and those they care about make financial choices guided by their Christian values. Faith is what fuels Andrew. Does it fuel you too? Call Andrew today at 612-246-0725 so you can take care of yourself and those you care about, including your local tribe and Men's Alliance.
Well, let's go back to the analogy of sports for a second. If you're raised up in a fan, let's say you're Rams fans, okay, and you got people in your family who have played for the Rams. That was true for me. I have a cousin who played for the Rams. So it's like, you're Rams fans. You're growing up that way. Okay, so now you're 30 and you realize, I can't remember a time when I wasn't a Rams fan. Now,
when did you become a Rams fan?
Yeah, exactly. Now, it was not an uninformed fanship. I can give you 15 reasons why the Rams are going to be great this year, and I can give you 15 reasons why they weren't great last year, and 15 reasons for the year before. And I can do this because all along I have been so utterly dedicated to this team that I can tell you their entire history and make a case for why this is the team. Now, at the end of that, are you really a Rams fan? I'd say yes. Well, but can you point to some moment? Oh, no, this is kind of how I was also, and Jimmy probably was too. Like, this is all we talk about. It's not like you are blindly trusting your family allegiance, because all along I've been making a case for why we have a family allegiance here, why we believe that he is our Savior, why we have given our life to him, like why we are trying to respond in a way that shows our gratitude for what he's already done for us. Okay, so we've been trying to live that. And I hope, are we like 100%? No one does this well, okay? And I haven't done it well. I've tried, but I know my own failings. And thank God Jimmy has no access to my head and my heart, because he'd know how dark I really am, okay? And occasionally I think he gets to see that. But he knows my need for it. Yeah, it's too late, yeah. But the point is, he knows my need for a Savior. Mm-hmm. But I also know my need for a Savior every day. I'm very comforted at every moment from what Paul says in the end of Romans 7 and the beginning of Romans 8. I mean, I know that I am that guy. He seems like he says, I've discovered this human condition, this reality about human nature, that anything I want to do, I don't do it. Mm-hmm. And if that's a reality about human nature, then we all are stuck in that same human nature. And I think that's true. But so for me and Jimmy, at least, and by the way, I've got 4 children. I don't think that's true for every one of my kids. I know it's not true. I know, like for my daughter, there's a moment when she can say it. She'll tell you, this is what had to happen to me. This is what had to train wreck before I realized that I had to give my life to Christ. So she's got a very different kind of testimony. But Jimmy was there and was old enough to watch me transition. So he kind of caught it the way that he's the only one, I think, probably, who could say this, because he was the only one who was old enough to watch the process.
Jimmy, you mentioned something a minute ago. You made a massive claim, and I want to go back to it and have you just unpack it for a second, because we skipped over it too quickly. You said that only Christianity has answers to the big questions. Like, tell us a little bit about what you mean by that. Maybe give an example or unpack that for the listener that's like, what did he just say? Other worldviews have answers too. Give us that breakdown.
Yeah, so I guess we'll use the example that we kind of focus on in this book, which is the question of the meaning or value of human life. When I was a new police officer, going through the academy, I realized that one of the first things they do is teach you the law. And what I started to realize was, the law puts human life above all other concerns. And so when I'm a new police officer working patrol, if I'm walking down the street, I can't just pull anyone over I want just because I want to do it. I can't just go in somebody's house. just rifle through their stuff just because I'm interested, because we have this right to privacy that the law enshrines, right? It's our Fourth Amendment right. It's one of the most important things that we have with us. It's in the Constitution. But if I'm walking down the street and I hear somebody screaming, he's killing me from the house, I can kick down the door and go in there and save somebody's life. And even though the privacy law says, hey, privacy is of the utmost concern, that is completely going to be ignored when we balance it against the need to protect human life. So human life has this extreme value, and all police officers around me understood this. We all knew that the most basic function of why we existed was to save human life. But almost nobody around me could tell you why human life is valuable. We just assumed it was, and I think it's a basic assumption that most people make, that life is valuable. And I think the value of life is kind of tied in with the idea of purpose, or the meaning of life. What is it here for? Why is it valuable? The other thing I saw in my career, sort of related, and I'll try to tie these two things together very quickly here, is I noticed everybody around me in law enforcement was taking a lot of identity in what they did. They were a cop. Like, all these young cops that I went through the academy with, they all had these big dreams of getting these special assignments, because that was going to be how they showed everyone around them that they were the best. They were the most the toughest, baddest cop out there, because they did something cool on patrol or they got a special assignment. They're all looking for this identity in what they did. That's who they were going to be. And all the best cops I knew who were older, they had really messed up family lives. Even in our own family, I knew cops who were great at their career, but their family life was pretty messed up because they put their identity solely in their job. But the problem with that was, what happens when you retire? You lose that identity. And so I saw this big weakness in people around me, that they took so much identity in what they did, even though that it was only going to be temporary. So I think that it always made me ask these questions throughout my career, because I was a Christian long before I went into law enforcement. I always had these questions of, where else could we say, other than, I know why I value human life, is because God created all life and he sees value in us. He's created us in his image. He has value. He loves us. But I always wondered, what do my coworkers think about this? And so I'd always kind of try to find, what are the alternative examples for where we would put human value. But the issue is that if there's not a transcendent being that can give you value, if all value is just your own opinion of yourself, your coworkers or your friends' opinions of you, society's opinions of you, it's placed in a job or a relationship that could potentially end. These things are not lasting. They're not true places you could find identity. And so I think that's a long-winded way of saying, I just have, in this area of meaning and purpose and value of life, and in pretty much all other areas, every time I've tried to find an alternative answer, it just always seemed like Christianity best could actually explain, why is it important for me to ignore your privacy and run into your home and save you? Why wouldn't privacy be just as important as your life?
Yeah,
Man,
it's interesting. What's interesting
solid.
about that too, Dave, is that and I think I was listening to you say that, Jimmy, is that you said it too, Dave. There's other explanations for value, how we get value. But think about them, and every other explanation for value, if it's achievement or relationship to somebody, or job, or a power, or race, or money, whatever it may be that makes you important, you think makes you important, all of those other ways would allow you an option to downgrade somebody else, to separate from somebody else. They're less important. Why? Because you made your importance based on your job assignment. Well, if you're not a cop, then you're less important. You made your value based on income. Well, if you make less money, you're less important. But if you ground identity and value as humans, because we're image bearers of a God who created us, the one thing you cannot do then is look to say, well, no, that dude's also created in the image of God. Oh, no, that guy's also created. Now we're stuck. we don't have a mechanism that allows us to separate from others, because we're not using something that's variable. We're using something immutable, that's unchanging, that's eternal, that is the highest standard possible. It's not different for him than it is for me. So now we're stuck with, now, this is why you'll see this. I have Bibles that I write for my grandchildren, and I was in Romans today for Jimmy's daughter Lucy, and I'm writing this commentary for her, and there's a passage where it talks about this, that if our value if it's in God, we're stuck with this now, and when you see the command to love others, that this is the fulfillment of the law, is to obey these commands, to obey, for example, these commands about how to treat others. Well, why is it this pain? Because this recognizes the fact that our identity has to be in God, not in anything else. Because if it wasn't something else, you wouldn't have to love that other person as much, because you'd know that there's something about him that's deficient because of his lack of achievement or whatever it is. So I think that's a good way to kind of argue that the Christian worldview does have a better claim when it comes to a better answer for that question. By the way, we just dropped Jimmy. He just texted me his Wi-Fi just went out on him. He's going to try to reload it. He's so frustrating. I'll try to use a different computer from now on, he said, but that's not going to help us. He might be out of it for the end of this. So
okay. This whole concept of what Jimmy's talking about, the value of human life, and you think like it's the highest valued item for law enforcement. Everything is protect human life, save human life. That cannot be explained outside of a theistic worldview, and this is something that's so. If you've grown up as an American, I would say you've got your Judeo-Christian values are so a part of you, you can't even separate yourself from them. To
true.
realize the fact that like not everybody values human life, and when you think about it through a Darwinian naturalistic worldview, aren't we all just highly evolved animals?
Well, so you're. I think sometimes people hear us having these conversations and they're like, "Oh, that's not true. I'm not a believer, but I value human life." What kind of an idiot would not value human life?
Right.
Even we would say, as evolutionary processes go, if that's how we got here, that humans value humans the same way that horses value horses. We think that humans are more important because we happen to be humans. Horses think that horses are more important because they happen to be horses. But okay, so if that's what you think is how we got here, at least acknowledge that in your high value of humans, you think some humans are more important than others. You do. And you'll be able to make some kind of, and this is true for Darwin too. He believed this was also true. This is true for anyone who takes a kind of a secular atheist kind of version of Darwinism seriously, is that if you're somebody who's impeding the evolution of the species, you need to be eliminated from the species. What do you do with people who are disabled, who are just basically dragging on resources that the rest are? Why should we have compassion? We would actually be a lot farther ahead if we just. This is what Hitler did. The first people Hitler destroyed were not the Jews; they were the people who were disabled.
Yeah, this leads to eugenics. This leads to abortion. Right? When you're just thinking about the human race through an efficiency lens of survival of the fittest. There's no like you said, you use the word compassion, right? Like there's no element of, well, why would we stop to be concerned about these humans who cannot help further the species?
Yes,
why is it?
Yeah, compassion becomes like a luxury that is you cannot embrace if you're trying to get from 0 to 50. This is going to slow you down. If you're trying to get to a certain place 5 generations from now, and you're just concerned about the evolutionary process of your species, well, then you're going to elevate only the people who can get you to what you perceive as the goal. And you're going to downgrade the people who are slowing you down from getting to that goal. And we see this culturally all the time. Don't think there's a group out there. Now, if Christians are doing this, shame on us, because we ought to know better. And I think what happens is you get a lot of people who claim the identity of Christ. Like Jesus says in Matthew 7, I'm going to say I never knew you, because you're doing these things in my name, yet you don't even seem to know what I've taught. I don't know you. You don't know me. By the way, to know Jesus is to know what he taught us. That's really, we sometimes think to know Jesus is to have a fuzzy feeling, like I sense his presence in my life.
Yeah.
Well, but to know someone is to know what they've said. And you see this all the time. You say you love me, John says in 1 John. But if you're not doing what I taught, well, that means you have to know what I taught, so you can do it. And if you don't know what I taught and you're doing, you have no relationship with me. So I think this is why the Christian worldview does ground you in a way, but you have to know what it is. You have to know what it teaches. So we're writing this book, right? This fictional book, and we're thinking, okay, so how do we get a room full of atheists? Everyone on this team is an atheist, okay? Everyone on this team is not a believer. So they're moving through, and they're trying to catch a guy who is is really basically provoking their thought patterns about human value. Because with each murder, they're starting to think, well, what is human value? How do I ground it? Why is this victim more important or less important? And I know we're going to run out of time here, but I just want to unpack this for a second. Okay, so we want to have a tangential character in the story who can at least come alongside the team and voice, what does a Christian worldview say about this? Because there is a robust answer for what Christianity says about this. And we're just going to feed that answer into the narrative at some point. But we're not going to be overly ambitious about it, because the reality of it is, I'm just going to tell you, if you're on a team of detectives and you know someone on your, I was this way, and so if you are this guy, just hear me. We had Christians on our agency, and they were not able to make a case robustly. They could be very aggressive, very factual, very persuasive when making a case for a particular suspect or a particular crime series. Very forceful. Most cops are pretty forceful in the sense they've got a command presence, right? And these guys would have a command presence in areas aside from Christianity. But when it came to their Christian faith, they kind of saw it as like, you just have to believe. It's like a personal thing. It just happens. What that disconnect for people like us who are case makers is really hard to embrace, really hard to understand. So I think in the end, we wanted to write something and this, the reality of it is, we would have looked at that Christian guy who's trying to voice a Christian worldview, and we would have said, whatever. So you're going to see some of that in this book, because that's just reality. That's how cops think.
Yeah.
You know, you're asking us to make every decision in this room. You're calling us here to sort out this mess that you got yourself into. Now we're going to get here, and we've got 5 minutes to sort this out and leave in such a way where we fixed it well enough that it's not going to come up again in this shift, because we don't want to come back here tonight. And we don't want our partners coming back here tonight because we didn't fix it. So it turns out you're giving us 5 minutes to have the power and authority to fix something. And if you have that attitude where I'm a 5-minute fixer, that does not work well in your personal life, I can tell you right now. And it does not lead you to be somebody who's soft enough to listen to. There's a lot of pride in 5-minute fixers, because we have to be like, okay, I know better.
Yeah.
You go over there. You come with me. You know, who has that kind of power? That's a pride issue. And so for a lot of people who have that authority, because that's their job, they are not willing to bend their knee to anybody else's view of anything. And when they get a Christian comes along, you better, okay, if you're going to ask me to believe this, you better be able to deliver this with the same force that I can deliver my 5-minute fix. If you can't do that, I'm not interested.
You know, this is such a great point, and I don't think I've ever really heard anybody talk about this, or haven't articulated this out loud. We do this training.
Maybe I shouldn't have said it out loud.
I just saw this last night. In this Men's Alliance, we do a program called Carry the Fire, and it's a training program to teach men how to articulate what we believe and why. And when you see a guy who speaks one way, maybe he's got that command presence, very competent and quick thinker, articulate. And when he's talking about his job, and let's say he's up here, and then you ask him something about why he's a Christian, if his response comes in at more of a little bit less confident, a little more hem-hawing, unsure, you get the feeling when you're listening to him, like, I don't think you've ever said this out loud before. I feel like you're practicing these words right now.
Yeah.
But
that's a good point, Dave.
But like when a guy who is not that great at his job, maybe he's not the sharpest guy, if everything he says is right here and his Christian faith is right here, it's kind of on par. That's what you would expect. Yeah. So my realization right now with you on this call is, the sharper you are professionally, the more competent you are professionally, you had better up your game as an ambassador for Christ accordingly and get it on par with where you are professionally. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a disservice to Christ if there's a disparity between your professional presence and your ambassador presence.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's something that I would say it this way. I think of all the things we could be confident and proficient at, nothing should take the place of our proficiency and our confidence in Christ. And a lot of that is is I always notice that your level, I talked about this in a book called Forensic Faith, your level of enthusiasm is directly connected to your level of preparation. It is about anything. Right? Part of the reason, why I've got a DA friend of mine, John Lewin, I do all my cases with. He's still working because he has to retire later than me. But he's very enthusiastic. Why? Because there's nobody who's better prepared at the moment the trial begins than John Lewin. He's the most prepared attorney in the room. I don't care about all the paralegals on either side. No one, when I give him the case, no one knows the case better than me. By the time we get to trial, no one knows the case better than John. Well, that level of preparation is what makes him so enthusiastic. And juries see that enthusiasm and they catch it right away. And they want to side with the man who has, or the woman who has enthusiasm. Because that dude clearly, or that girl clearly thinks it's true. Now, that is true for us too. The reason why we're not enthusiastic, and but we are enthusiastic about our jobs, we can belt that out because we prepare ourselves for years and we're in that job every day thinking about the job. Like we're prepared. That's how we held our job. We're prepared. Well, we aren't prepared when it comes to Christianity. We have not. In my mind, for the years that I was becoming a Christian, over that period of months, I was always having conversations in my mind, like conversations between the doubting version and the believing version. And these are the same conversations I've had thousands of times since with friends who aren't believers. Like there's virtually no question that someone's going to ask me that I am not prepared to answer. The answer might be terrible, but I'm prepared with it because I've had that conversation in my mind 1,000 times. And I think the things you love are the things you think about. If you really love Jesus this much, there's times when I have to do my job. You're in the moment. You have to do this. But what are you doing with your discretionary time? The stuff that you don't have to do anything. By the way, your discretionary time and your thoughts and your discretionary money in your life both reveal your gods. It's not about where you have to pay a mortgage, but what are you doing with the money you could spend any way you want? That tells me what your God is. That tells me what your object of worship is. The same is true with your thoughts. I have to think about in the moment. I have to think about my job. But when I'm on the way home, and that's now behind me, what am I thinking about? This is the stuff we have to ask ourselves. And by the way, if you'll just give your time and money to your discretionary time and your discretionary money to the things of God, it all changes. Everything changes. And Jimmy was watching that in our lives. So he just caught it. But here's what he didn't catch. He didn't catch an uninformed faith.
Right.
He caught an informed faith because that's the only kind of faith I could embrace.
Man,
so that's
so
I think that was the difference.
Man, that's awesome. Your idea about combining some apologetics into graphic novels, I think incredible. There's so many different ways you could come at that, and you would probably reach a totally different group.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think that for us too, we thought, well, okay, if we're going to do this, are we going to, what are we going to do with? I mean, there's so many different directions you could go, like you said. And so, wouldn't it be great if we knew up front, we're going to do 20 of these. Well, then we could figure out what are the 20 top topics that we want to do.
Yeah.
But we didn't know how many we're going to do, and we still don't know how many we'll do. So we're trying to figure out, so it really is what system do you take? Which is the key? I think what we're trying to do sometimes is avoid what seems like the obvious trite one. Okay,
right.
Problem of evil. We'll deal with some of that, but we wanted to find something that was a little more subtle that we could unpack.
Man, that's great. So I got this here, Jimmy.
Nice.
Check this out.
About time that we got it to you.
So it's hard to describe, maybe just because I'm not good with words. It's got an incredible feel. You don't want to put the thing down, right? The pages are thick, and the cover feels like it's like weatherproof or something. It feels just awesome. And so this got me into looking at just doing some Google searching for graphic novels and Christian graphic novels, and tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing something. It doesn't seem like it seems like whatever comes up when I Google search that is usually stuff for kids.
Yeah,
It's a lot of
I think,
juvenile books.
well, Jimmy can say better because
Yeah.
there's a rich history, and we actually include with a purchase of this book. If they go back to our website and say, "Yeah, we purchased the book," we send them Jimmy's Christian comic book directory, where he's like going to show you everywhere else you can get
Okay.
reliable sources for Christian comic books. So, Jimmy, what do you think about that idea of a graphic novel, though? I can think
So
of
usually
one.
when I think about the differences between graphic novel and comic books, it's not so much like the content, like what section on the page, it's the format. And so typically that you think of a comic book, it's shorter, usually around 20 pages, it's staple bound, and graphic novels are thicker, they're longer, they're bound like a book. And sometimes you'll get like a higher quality paper and stuff like that. You definitely see that with ours. So if you're looking for graphic novels, there probably is going to be less out there that's specifically Christian. Actually, the things that come to my mind immediately are adaptations of the Bible. There's a number of adaptations of the Bible that are in collected forms. Yeah. Obviously, with under Crux Studios, the imprint that our book came out under is the Action Bible, which is one of those, but there's a variety of others.
Yep.
I think if you look at just Christian comic books, there is more, but it's still not, in the grand scheme of all comic books, is still the minority. And yeah, I think, especially because it's a small group of people who are looking for Christian comics, I think people are trying to, it makes sense. Publishers are trying to cast a wide net and try to get everybody, as many possible readers as possible. So I don't know if we were wise or crazy to try to do something that's a little bit more niche. We went crime. It's a little bit older. You're not going to give this to your 5-year-old to read. And it's not.
Yeah, this is clearly like an adult thing, right? It's like right on the cover you got like a dead body, with a sheet on it and blood dripping down, which I love, and then the guy with his firearm drawn. So it's like it's not questionable. Like I look up other books and you're kind of looking at them and you're questioning. You're like, is this for kids? Is this for kids? And if you're not sure, if you're a man and you're not sure if the book is for kids or not, you're probably not going to buy it. But if it's clearly for adults, I'm thinking this. Here's where I'm going. I know tons of guys in MA who are not readers, right? We got a lot of guys that love to say, I'm not a reader.
And they wear it like a badge, right? I've seen that a lot. I've seen that a lot too. Yeah, so I totally get it. Yeah.
And I'm always trying to tell people, and I'm fighting an uphill battle here, but I'm trying to tell people, you don't get to say that. That's like saying I'm not a toothbrusher. It's like you just have to do it. You have to do it. It doesn't matter. But I think we could even get, and my co-host Shadow, who is not here today, I think Shadow could read this. Shadow, I'm going to give you a copy of this. And,
hold on a minute. Wait a minute. Hold on. Back up. So is that a compliment or is that an insult? I'm trying to figure out what that is.
It's neither. It's just a statement.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
Shadow
that's an insult. That's
would
an
like
insult
to
then.
read
Okay.
this. Would like to read this.
Yeah. If you say
novel.
it's neither, that's the same as saying it's
I
an
think
insult.
that-
Okay, so here's what I would say to you.
Oh, I
Go
just
ahead,
think,
Jimmy.
especially outside of the comic book reader world, there's like a perception that comic books are for kids, and obviously, way back in the days, that was predominantly true. I mean, this is a long time ago. You go back 50 years, that's true. But I think I was influenced in terms of what like kind of stories we could tell, being a comic book reader myself and a graphic novel reader. And for me, one thing that kind of was in the back of my mind as we did this is I was thinking about the first graphic novel. The very first graphic novel that came out was in the 70s, and it was not aimed at kids. It was aimed at adults, and it had religious themes. It was not written by a religious person, but the whole concept of the story was the story of a Jewish rabbi who loses their daughter. I think it's their daughter. And I might be getting my stories confused, but I believe it's his adopted daughter dies, and he has this crisis of faith. And it's not written by a religious person, but they use this story to discuss their own ideas about could a good, loving God exist, and they're kind of unpacking it. It's a very emotional story. And so I think when we had this opportunity, we could do a graphic novel. In my mind, I mean, this is the lens I'm seeing it through. Graphic novels are things that don't just speak to children. They don't just speak to, hey, this is a fun story, a good little romp through an adventure. No, the graphic novels are something that from the outset tackled these big, important, emotional questions that are very existential. And so this is what we want to approach. Now, I don't necessarily know. I would say I put myself on the same level as the graphic novel writers and artists that came before us, but I want to try to be in that same realm.
What's interesting too about this too, Dave, is that you're absolutely right. So people who have read this book will say 13 and up. It's a 13 and up book. Like, if you're 13 years old and you're watching any streaming anything, even if you're watching legacy TV after 9 o'clock at night, you are seeing crime dramas that are far more graphic than anything we're going to talk about in this book. Okay, so that stuff's already out there. I think the bar has, Criminal Minds, I think, is one of those shows that kind of took the bar and it's like the macabre started to come on, just regular TV. And so I think that if you're familiar with that, this is not going to shock you. Sure. But what's interesting to me is I think as parents, as dads, we do need to protect the innocence of our kids, period. We do need to protect the innocence of our kids. And our kids don't need to know certain things about the way the world is until at certain points. But at some point, when they're learning it from others instead of from us, that's where I think we have to step in and talk about what's real in the world. Because if Christianity is true, like we always say, it's going to be true even in a dirty, gritty world where bad things happen. And we have to be able to navigate. What does the Christian worldview say about that, number one? And how do people survive when it's not Pollyannish? It's not going to be the way. It's not going to be. There's not always going to be a happy ending. There's not always going to be, a pain-free life. And bad things are going to happen to good people. And we have to kind of figure out, what does the Christian worldview say about that? So I am, number one, really want to be concerned about protecting the innocence of young people. But at the same time, there is that kind of right of, and what happens, it's all controlled now by the glowing rectangle. It's not like if your kids get a glowing rectangle at some point, if you're going to give it to them in junior high, well, then we might as well start talking about the way the world really is, because they're going to bump into it now. And I always tell my youth group, and Jimmy was part of that youth group, I don't want you to hear the nonsense that comes from non-believers first from non-believers. I want you to hear that first from me. And we'll address that nonsense, and we'll address how to respond to it and how to think about it. And I'd rather you hear it from me first than from them first. So we want to expose our kids to the atheist ideas that don't work, and we want to be the ones to. So I always knew that when Jimmy went to UCLA, by the time he got to UCLA, there wasn't a stupid thing he was going to hear that he hadn't already heard from me. Because we talked about those.
I really
things.
like that. It's oftentimes the stuff that surprises us that knocks us off our feet. Not necessarily because of its strength or its rationality, but because of just the fact that it caught us off guard.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. That's why your ministry is I think I reached out to you first. Or I can't remember how this worked, because I knew that you were doing it. And so, you just sent us this I'm going to do a shameless plug for you now, this answer with truth, which is, the ambassador's field manual for leading your family spiritually. I do think that it is part of our responsibility as parents to show our kids. And sometimes it happens organically because you're just so geeked out about it. It was organic for me. I wasn't like saying, I got to get up today and teach my kids this principle. We were talking about this stuff anyway, and they happened to catch it sideways. So
that
it was
is
kind
a
of like,
great point, right? Like when the dad is reading something and learning something and passionate about it, he's just gonna talk about it when he's riding in the car.
Well, it's interesting is every day I call Jimmy sometimes on his way home from work, and I call him, we just talk about a bunch of nothing. But a lot of times what we're talking about is his avid interest in like the history of theology, how theological principles evolved in the early church, and trying to figure out like how do we get back to what's true. And so a lot of what we're doing, it's not like we say, oh, now is a time for us to catechize each other. No, it's just that, when if I call some people, our conversations are going to be about football, or they're going to be about something else that we're geeked out about, or it's going to be about how I've got a friend I talk to every week, and we talk about how the maintenance on this huge lodge that he's running, and we're talking about, maintenance stuff. Okay. Whatever you're geeked out about, that's what you're going to talk about. And if you're with your kids and you just happen to be geeked out about this stuff, well, they're going to probably catch it. And that's what I think probably happened more with Jimmy than us being intentional. I don't think I was very intentional. If I hadn't gotten saved, this guy would know everything he needs to know about home improvement, because that was what I was doing before I got saved. So he would, now what happens is he doesn't need me to tell him what's right about theology. He knows how to study that. But occasionally he'll call me for a home improvement.
I was going to say the same thing. Exactly.
Right? Because I didn't pass that on. I chose to pass on the other thing. And so that's why both of my kids will call, my boys will call me and say, how do I, my son David just called me about how to fix a dryer. So he's trying to figure it out. What's great, by the way, Dave, is, and this is one thing we got to think about, is that we are in a generation that's highly visual, and everything is available to them on YouTube. So for example, I thought about this in the sense that I didn't have a YouTube to go to, and I learned how to fix say a water faucet, or a valve in a stem valve in a shower. I didn't know how to do it. We just took it apart, made a lot of mistakes, figured it out. Maybe you had a book that had something kind of close. Well, now you can just YouTube the exact model of the faucet you've got, and someone's taking it apart and showing you how to do it. Well, the same is true theologically, though. It turns out there's tons of people out there who are talking about God. Now, what's interesting is, at least on the YouTube video, when it's a Moen faucet, F4, whatever it is, at least I know that this guy's taking apart the same faucet that I have. So I could, but when you watch theological videos, you have no idea whether that person has any idea what they're talking about.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And there's the problem, is that we just did that conference. I think you and I were talking about this conference that we did in Southern California, that was all YouTubers on the stage. So the audience were all young Christians who get their information about Jesus from YouTubers. Now,
that sounds scary to me.
Okay, it could be. Now, it turns out that this particular group that we were dealing with, they are kind of an apologetics interested kind of a crowd. Some people were there. They were great. But I thought about it, but I mean, there's a lot of bad information out there, and it sits right alongside. It's in the suggestions on the right side of every video. Mm-hmm. And you don't know whether that stuff's been vetted. It's just that this is also popular with this title. And so I think we have to be really careful to help our kids to distinguish truth from error. And that's why I think your book, when you're talking about, there's a truth about these topics, and we ought to focus on that truth, because you're going to hear a lot of lies.
I'll take I'll try to defend the YouTubers, I guess, for a second here, and I won't.
Yes.
I don't know. I won't defend every person. However, I would argue that probably the best information that's out there is probably available to some degree on YouTube or through podcasting on Spotify, etc. And I think it's something for us to consider, because I sometimes will think to myself, I wonder to what degree this will influence the church going forward. Now, maybe I'm getting off track a little bit here from what our topic is, but I've just sometimes thought about this. If the greatest preachers also are on Spotify or on YouTube, and the greatest apologetics, the greatest theological thinkers are on YouTube, and you're attempting to draw somebody to your local church because you have a pastor who's a good speaker, they've got to be really good or really knowledgeable. If the reason you're going to church is the speaker, the pastor, because I would disagree that YouTube is full of uncredentialed, unknowledgeable people. There are, there's always going to be somebody out there saying something wild, but there are amazing credentialed double PhDs who are doing weekly videos talking about every possible topic of theology, and probably are more knowledgeable and maybe a better communicator than your local pastor. And I sometimes wonder, should we be thinking more in our churches about the corporate aspects of our worship? Because that's the thing you can't get, not necessarily the teaching. And I think if you're too quick to write off these people, they're just YouTubers, I think you're going to miss what probably the younger generation already sees, which is that all probably the most intellectually fulfilling, maybe even spiritually fulfilling conversations are there on YouTube.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I'm with you. We have a YouTube channel. So I'm not against YouTubers at all. And a lot of the people we love who are, they have active YouTube channels where, like you guys, where you're actually broadcasting conversations. Yeah. Here's what I would say is different, though, is that you see a lot of authors who are on these platforms. And it turns out the deepest, most cited The cited versions of their work is in their book. But they often YouTubers don't go. I'll give you an example. This is my own. I'm guilty of it too. James Lindsay wrote a great book on critical race theory a couple of years ago. I think it's called Cynical Race Theory. I forget what he called it, but it was a great book. Now, did I read the book? No. A lot of my friends did. But I basically watched like 5 long-form YouTube and podcast videos of him talking about his book. Now, it turns out, though, that if I want to know what is the actual data source for what he's talking about, I'd have to have his book. But I think a lot of people who, and this is what my wife always says, be careful when you do these videos, because people, if you cover everything in the book, they're not going to buy your book. And I used to always say, oh, well, that's not true. People, well, actually, there is some truth to it. As an author, I've seen it. So the question becomes, yes, you're going to get, the question, Jimmy even said it, is how much will you get? You'll get a lot, maybe even enough for you to be able to say, okay, I think I know enough about that topic now to move on. But you won't get the fullest thing the author did, because the author might have spent a year and a half resourcing and citing and collecting the data and pointing you back to the data sources. And you just don't do that in interviews. In interviews, you just are surfing at the top level of these things. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of get the book to go deeper. The book is always going to be the most thorough coverage of the topic. It just is. Right. It's the nature of books. You're not going to read a book in front of an interview. Right. So the reality of it is that, yes, I think that there are good sources, tons of really good sources. Here's the problem. And you notice this if you're in the Amazon generation that we're in right now. So, for example, if you look at our books, I want you to go down and look at the other ones that Amazon says are like our book. Okay. Some are really good. Some are really bad. Some are from atheist sources that if you didn't know, you'd click that and you'd buy that book thinking that's from a Christian, and it's not, but it was recommended at the bottom. And this is what's happening on YouTube often. It's not just that it doesn't have good, of course it's got good stuff. The problem is it also has some percentage of error that is presented as though it's not. And I don't know how you would sort through that if you did. Now look, I think most of us, like you and I, we kind of know who's who in the zoo. So we kind of know, oh, that's so-and-so. I like his work. But if you're just coming to it new and kind of asking, one of these AI platforms, what is true about this? Well, how do you vet it if you don't know who's who in the zoo? That's all I'm saying. I think we have to be careful.
Yeah,
we have mistakenly thought that celebrity is the same as trusted authority. And you got some people out there with 1 million followers who are not even speaking the truth. I can name a few names right now. I almost did an interview with one of them not knowing anything about him. And I realized, ooh, I'm so glad I didn't do that interview. I had no idea. It got nearly 1 million followers on YouTube. So we have to kind of be careful about how, there are, yes, of course there are great sources. The problem is they're mixed in with, even if it's a small percentage, that's where the danger is. This is what Paul would say. Yeah. It's not that everyone in your church is a mess, is that you have one or two. And those one or two are dangerous.
Yeah, no, we definitely have to be careful with whether we're reading or watching videos, or I remember it seems to me like kind of from my age, this thing really came about with Wikipedia. That was the first time it was like this big warning of like, hey, anybody can put this stuff on there. You have to be very discerning, and whatever you get from here, go double check it somewhere else, right? It's like we really have to do the same thing with books too, right? Like people can self-publish anything and put it out there. And so yeah, there's both like a tendency, I think, of people to want to listen to stuff that supports their view. So there's that little echo chamber factor where people are going to be drawn towards whatever, tells them what they like to hear. And then there's the part of, we got to all be vigilant and double check. We got to double check the good guys and the bad guys, kind of, the people we agree with and the people we disagree with.
Yeah, I'm an adjunct professor at 3 different seminaries, and I can tell you we do not allow students to import into their papers references from YouTube channels or from Wikipedia. It's going to have to be from a published book by a publisher who has a vetting process in place. And then, so you can interview John Smith about this, and he's a PhD guy, and he's got a YouTube video. But we don't want that video in our citation. You need to go back and find out what's that book and I want you to cite the book. It's not because we're like favoring books. And maybe this will change, by the way. This could absolutely change going forward. I don't know. But because there's no gatekeeper at YouTube, And you assume that Zondervan or that, InterVarsity Press or whoever it is that's a publisher is the gatekeeper to make sure that they're not allowing. And this is why a lot of people will say, "Oh, that publisher now is publishing this heretic, so we're done with that publisher." Okay, it's because we think of publishers as gatekeepers, and there are no gatekeepers on YouTube. And that's why I think you have to be. That means that you have to become the gatekeeper, which means you have to know, at least know who's who in the zoo.
Jimmy, I've got a question for you. One of the things I think our listeners want to know is what comic books influenced you as a kid? When you were growing up, what were your favorites? What were you reading? You a DC guy, a Marvel guy?
So when I first got into comics, I was lucky to have a collection that actually I had a number of people who kind of influenced me in the way into comics. But my biggest collection of comic books was from an uncle who'd left his collection, which I think he got from somebody older than him, like some older kid in the neighborhood, at my grandma's house. And so that was predominantly Marvel Comics. There were some DCs and some other third-party publishers in there, but for the most part, it was Marvel Comics. So that was always that's the first thing when I think about comics. I still think about Marvel Comics because that's like the my entry into the medium, I guess. And for me, the two that stood out from his collection was Spider-Man. He had a ton of the original Stan Lee Spider-Mans. And then he had a bunch of X-Men from Chris Claremont, who is the longest running writer of X-Men. And I would actually say that those were very influential, not only in my love of comics, but in my life in general, because both these superheroes, Spider-Man and the X-Men, they both had a big emphasis on personal sacrifice, and that there was a big moral connection between being a good person and sacrificing. And the X-Men were the mutants, the heroes. What do they say? They were loved and I don't know what were they said? Hated and feared by the world they were sworn to protect. Okay, it took me a second to remember that, but this idea that these were these mutants that the society didn't like and would persecute them if they had a chance. But even though the society hated them, they would still risk their lives to save society because that was the right thing to do, not because of they were going to personally benefit in some way. And so that was very, very influential for me. Just in my general moral development, but also in my love of comics. Because I think it showed me that even though both of those would be considered kind of all ages, at least at that time, not so much anymore, but at that time, Spider-Man and X-Men was all ages appropriate, they still were dealing with these bigger, more deep philosophical questions about what really makes somebody good or bad.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. There's some objective moral questions involved, in the compelling narrative there that I love. That's really interesting.
Dave, I think I got lucky with Jimmy too, is that he was the kind of kid who would ask those questions.
Yeah.
Like I think you could easily read through those books and not even notice some of that stuff.
Take it for granted. Just that's the way it is.
Yeah. So that's why I think, it did actually serve him well. I want to ask you that, Jimmy. Did you keep those comics? Did they get saved or did they not make it to your collection?
I would say the majority of that original collection I still have. I mean, I was reading those when I was really little, so some of them that I remember reading I no longer have. I threw them away or left them at the beach or something, or who knows what I did as a kid, or just they disintegrated because I read them so many times over and over and over. But for the majority of those original comics, I still have them. And for Spider-Man and X-Men, I actually spent a long time going back and filling in the holes to sort of complete the collection of those runs. Not all the Stan Lee ones. You can't even look at the early Spider-Mans anymore. They're all exorbitantly priced. But of the areas that I filled them in.
And that's something, Dave, that you talked about when you said it. You said that this is almost feels like it's like it's heavy and thick paper.
Yeah.
And, there's a collectible aspect of artwork in these volumes, as we talked about, that it really is. You take care of them, and you fill in your collection. Why would you do that? Because you have a sense that there's almost like something here that is valuable in its own right, just as a piece of art. And we didn't, like Jimmy said before, we don't get credit for that. That's the artists that get credit for that, and that's the publisher. That's one of the advantages, by the way, is that we didn't go with the comic book publisher. We went with a legitimate, not that comic book publishers aren't legitimate, but I mean we went with the traditional book binding kind of publisher that does books. that then also, puts them in places where comic book vendors probably don't get, which is like the bookstores that we're selling these things in, which I think in some ways helps us, because I think it guarantees that this book will probably be around for a while, and it could hopefully have some impact, unlike a comic book that might run out of print. This is the kind of thing that's going to continue to be printed if people find it valuable.
I think that's great. Tell us, Jimmy, who's your intended audience for this book? Who is like your absolute guy you wrote this for?
Now you're going to see how self-centered I am. I am the guy that that this was made for.
Hey,
at least for me.
That makes total sense,
both
right?
contributed so much to this book that I wouldn't. I think I don't see this book as being one or the other of ours. I see both of us in it. But when I was contributing to the work, I think that the person I was thinking about was me. I was somebody who loved comics. I love and have an interest in law enforcement, not just because I work in it, but I love crime stories, crime movies, crime comics. And I love apologetics. Obviously, the faith is the most important thing in my life, and I approach it typically through the lens of apologetics. So for me, I had these three loves that I was able to express or pour my heart into this comic with. So for me, if you like one of the three things or a combination of them, then I'm sure I hope it will also resonate with you. And I'm hoping that there's somebody else out there who is similar to me, and therefore that they will also like it. But generally speaking, if I'm trying to put on my salesman hat, I think just if you're generally interested in any type of crime story, I hope that this will kind of scratch that itch, but then also maybe communicate some of these other ideas that maybe you're not necessarily coming to the story because you want a faith story, but hopefully you'll get something out of it maybe you weren't expecting.
Man, I like that. Now, it doesn't say this anywhere on your book, but I saw it on Amazon. When I was looking at your book on Amazon, I think Amazon says Volume 1.
Yes.
There's
a little number one hidden on the
coming?
spine there.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. There's a 1. So is 2 in the works?
2 is in the works. We're hard at work at it right now. We've been going back and forth about some, the overall plot, and now we're actually in the scripting phase, and we'll create a script to follow it up. So, what can we say to tease this? We want a story that'll stand on its own, that you'd be able to read if you came to number 2 first. You'd still enjoy it, but we'll feature a lot of the same characters, and we want to ask another apologetic question. So I think the next question, this first volume, we really focus on the argument from human value, that if human life really has value, objective value, that there needs to be a value giver or a God. Now we're going to kind of take a similar approach in volume 2. We're going to talk about the moral argument. If there are really things that are right and wrong, and there's really good and evil, how do we ground that? And ultimately, as apologists, we're going to argue that good and evil can only be grounded in the existence of a God.
And think about that too, Dave. That's an interesting question for law enforcement, right? Because all of even national politics related to enforcement of law right now is, does the end justify the means?
Right.
And I think that we have to ask that question every time you do. Look, we saw this, for example, even in the border policies and the deportation policies. Like we got to ask these questions. And so, but here's the point: is that if you said, well, no, there's some good that's being violated in that action, well, who gets to decide what the good is? Like what are we grounding that good in? Because clearly the agency that's doing it is saying, no, from our perspective, this was right to do. So what is it that transcends the agency or the nation or the series of nations? Like, what is it? Is there an objective, transcendent source for what ought to be? And that's something that we hope that our laws reflect those ought to be's. But that's a good question to ask. Is this just wrong because in the state of California we passed a law that said it was wrong? There are some laws in California that we think legalize things that ought not happen. So why do we think they ought not happen? If it's just grounded in the law, they ought to happen because the law says they ought to happen. But we think there's something bigger than the law, bigger than the lawgivers, bigger than the legislation, that the legislators that gather together to form laws. We think there's an objective, transcendent lawgiver. And so now the question becomes for us, like, how do we, you could preach that and it's like blah 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 blah. We want to be able to tell it in a story that makes it something you want to investigate for yourself.
My dad and I were just actually talking with some Christians, and they were talking about a story that they'd heard in the news where a police officer used lethal force. I forget what the exact details were, but they were really scandalized because the family of the person who'd been killed by the police had tried to sue the department or sue the police officers involved, and the judge had said, you can't sue him. This was a legal act, so you can't sue him. And they were just absolutely like, what a miscarriage of justice. This judge absolutely was wrong to not allow them to sue. And so I was explaining to them, hey, actually, under the laws of the United States, the scenario, I forget what the details were, but the scenario that they're explaining to us actually is lawful. The police officer is lawful under these particular laws. And they were just absolutely shocked because they're saying, but that was wrong. How could it be lawful if it was wrong? And I think it shows a disconnect. I mean, and it's not even necessarily that I had to disagree with them on a moral level. It's just it showed a disconnect where they're assuming that what is right and wrong is equivalent to what the law allows. Yeah. But I think we all understand that there's times when the law is not equivalent to what we believe is right and wrong. But the law actually comes from society. The law is grounded in the culture. We all vote for these people. These people make these laws. So you would think that if we can ground right and wrong in the culture or society we come from, then the law that we follow is always what is right and wrong. And to deviate from the law would actually be itself wrong because that's how we define it. But I'm with people who would say that there's lots of things that are wrong that the government does that are lawful. But if we're going to say that, if we're going to make that argument, they shouldn't do that. We need to know, how can we actually, what are we grounding it in then? What law are we pointing to that is higher than the government's law?
Yeah, what authority? I mean, like, that adultery is immoral, yet it's legal. So we cannot equate those two things. All legal, what's legal is not necessarily moral. But that's the question is, well, what makes it immoral? Who says it's immoral? I mean, especially in a culture right now that seems like it's taken so many things that we would have said just 30 years ago. No, that's clearly wrong. Those things are no longer clearly wrong. So I think we are in a place where we have to ask the question, like, how are we grounding these things? And do we care if it's shiftable? Do we care if it's now, are we going to be able to do all of that in a novel that is really trying to talk about an investigation of a crime series? 'Cause that's typically what we're going to do. Is going to be detectives chasing a bad guy. Okay. So I think we have to figure out how to do this in a way that the story is good. If a story doesn't cause you to turn the pages, you're never going to get to the aha moment. So first and foremost, we have to write a good story.
Yeah. So you are tackling some big, heavy-hitting topics in these graphic novels. I love it. You're highlighting the fact that, like Paul wrote to the Romans, we all have the law written in our hearts, right? Like,
that's right.
We know what's right and wrong because God put it there, even if that differs from what our state tells us. So, I think most people, certainly our listeners, know the law enforcement background of Jay Warner. But Jimmy, you're also in law enforcement. Tell us a little bit about your professional side.
Well, I just basically don't think for myself, and I just copy my father in every way possible. So he liked apologetics. I went like apologetics, got my degree in apologetics. He was a cop. I became a cop. Same agency, But no.
Hey, I want to stop you real quick. What you're doing actually takes more courage than trying to do something different for the sake of being different. It takes a lot of courage to do the thing you want to do when the thing you want to do is also what your dad did. I'll just say that because I made a lot of foolish decisions early in my life because I wanted to be different, right? And it was like I just was different for the sake of being different. And so, like, whatever my older sisters did, I did the opposite. Even if I should have done what they did, because what they did was smart. So kudos to you for doing exactly the thing you want to do and not being afraid to make a good joke about it.
Well, it's funny you said that because I felt like I became a cop and I wanted to do a better job, than my dad, to be honest. I wanted at least not to be a second to him. And I've talked to my dad about this, so we're both talking about Jimmy. And we're like realizing that of the three of us who've done this job, really only one is a natural, and it ends up being Jimmy. There's something about him that, he's just far more interested to deep dive these details. And he's a natural at this. I was in the arts before I came to it. Could I do this job? Yeah, I could do it. Was it really probably my innate gifting? No. But I knew my dad had done it, and it served his family well. And so for selfish reasons, I came over and became a cop.
Interesting.
But for Jimmy, it's kind of like what he always wanted to be. So I give him
You can
credit
see
for that.
how
You're
I've
right.
pulled the
It
wool
did
over my dad's eyes and convinced him that I'm doing a good job over there. But what I think it was is, as a kid, I distinctly remember one day that I always think back to. I was at my great grandparents' house, and I'm sitting around the table listening to my family all tell stories. And my grandfather is telling my dad. My dad's telling my grandfather about some recent murder that there had been, and he's telling him about all the details of some grisly scene that he'd gone to and how crazy it was, this, the way that they'd killed this person. I don't remember the details, but I remember him going on and on about this murder, really in like gory detail. I don't even know how old I was, probably too young to be listening to this. And then my grandfather responds to that, "Oh yeah, that really reminds me of this time when I opened up a door to a room and there was so much blood that had piled up and had congealed on the ground. So there was like a half an inch of blood, And I just remember thinking at that moment, like, wow, my family, when they tell stories that are just not like any of my friends' families. And I think that I drank the Kool-Aid in that moment and said, when I get older, I need to have a story that if they tell these stories again, I could somehow compete with. And I think after that, there was just no way. In high school, I considered not going into law enforcement. Do I really want to? Is this really what I want to do? Is there something else? But I don't think I ever really could escape that.
I get it, man. The person with the best stories is definitely an attractive, person to follow. That reminds me of one time when I was on a deployment in the Middle East. A bunch of us were just sitting around telling the grossest stories we could possibly ever tell and trying to outdo one another. And the two winners of this competition were prior cop. He was second place. The only person who has worse stories that can outdo a cop is a nurse.
Yeah, I don't like that medical stuff. That's too much for me.
Cops and nurses, man, their stories were just mind-blowing.
And the nurse story is often really gross, too. It's not just about mayhem and evil. It's about some gross body function I don't need to talk about.
The cop stories, they have everything. They have gross ones, but they also have funny ones.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
So
I could do a few of those. Go ahead.
I want to pitch an idea to you for a future graphic novel. And a guy who goes to work every day and comes home and gets on his laptop and has no friends. He's totally isolated. He is drowning in comfort. He's got everything society tells him to buy. He wants for nothing. And whenever anyone asks him how he's doing in the church lobby on Sunday, he says he's fine. And he discovers Men's Alliance. And it gets him out of isolation, out of his comfort zone, and out of his facade of being fine. So, I think you work that character in.
Well, I think you're gonna have to write that one because you're probably meeting a lot of people who are like that. So I do think, though, that the cops do have an unusual challenge in front of them. We're getting ready to go. Jimmy's mom and I are getting ready to go and serve a community of police officers, couples that have experienced terrible trauma and critical incidents of one nature or another. And we do this work every summer with Billy Graham Association, and we meet a lot of people like this who, and we always worry about it. Sadly, a lot of the people, probably 70% of the people that we meet up there, are Jimmy's age. And they see us in a paternal or maternal role. Like they always say, "Oh, you're the cop, Papa," because I'm the old guy. And it took a while for me to realize, wow, these are Jimmy's. These are Jimmy's generation of cops. 10 to 15 years on the job. Really, often very discouraged. They worked the job prior to and post COVID, and the environment was very different on both sides. And they also worked it prior to and post the George Soros DAs being planted in every city. And so they've, and a lot of these guys go in with very altruistic Boy Scout ideas about how they're going to serve their community. And they are from all over the country, small towns. And you wouldn't believe how many of these folks are working in what really feels like it's a very low-paying, regular job. They could leave it tomorrow and work in any other facility, including fast food, and probably make the same money. So why are they serving as police officers and taking the risk when the benefits aren't really much better than if they were working at a Starbucks? So why? It's because they feel called to it. It's part of their identity. It's part of what they wanted to do. They wanted to serve their communities. And when you meet those people, you're like going, wow. We're in Los Angeles County. You could actually, this is a career in Los Angeles County. It's just a job almost everywhere else. And in small towns all over America, this is just, it's an interchangeable job. You could come in and leave it and probably make better money someplace else. And I'm thinking this is going to be a challenge to even get people in the profession because the alternatives are actually looking better and better. So I think that you're right. There needs to be ministries in place. There aren't a lot of ministries for cops, but I bet these other kinds of ministries like Men's Alliance will fill the gap. And so
you heard it here first. J. Warner Wallace, whoa. Popo Papa.
Yeah, there you go. There it is.
Well, Jimmy, thank you for what you're doing as well as Jim. You guys are doing a very, very thankless profession in this country. I saw on the news just this past week another article. It was about the Minneapolis Police Department and some woes there. And it just, like, my thought as I read the article was, I can't believe there's still police in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Right? Like, who is still doing this job? How are they even wanting to still be there? But like you said, it's a calling for them, right? That's the only way to explain it, is people must be there because that's their city and they still love it and they're trying to protect it, even in the face of overwhelming, adversity to try to do that job. So, I know that Men's Alliance, we are very pro law enforcement as an organization. Not only do we have a lot of cops within our ministry, but we try to reach out to and minister to first responders and cops. We do a little thing called Helping the Heroes, where we reach out to them every year at Christmas, and we hand out gift cards for groceries and tell men about joining tribes in their local areas, just to say thanks, because we know that they're just getting so beat down every other day of the year.
Yeah, that's the kind of work that actually small things make a big difference. It's small relational things make a big difference to people. So that's why we have to kind of take a one person at a time kind of an approach. And you think, well, that seems like it's so small. Am I really making a dent? Well, yeah, you are. All this kind of, it's that order of affections that is in Scripture. That you're first, you take care of your family first, but next is your church, and the next is your local community. And it turns out that all of these efforts really start off locally. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a national influence, but it turns out if you start with just your own community, and that's why it's one-on-one stuff, and it's it's easy to feel like I'm not making any difference, but you can't get caught up in that. It's just one person at a time.
So Jimmy, here's what I heard. If you like comic books / graphic novels, or if you like crime novels, or if you like Christian apologetics. So those were your three, right? So if you're listening to this, if you've got 1, 2, or 3 of those, you're going to love this graphic novel, Case Files. So I'm thinking, man, like if you have a background, maybe when you were a kid, you were reading comic books, now you love crime novels, and you're getting into apologetics, then you're absolutely the guy to pick up a copy of Case Files, Murder and Meaning. There it is again. Give you guys a shot of this thing. If you're listening to us on Spotify as you're driving to work right now, you'll just have to go click on the show notes and check this out. I wanted to ask you, is there another website? What's the best website for people to go to and learn more about this book and get a copy?
Well, there's two ways you can get at it. The same landing page. It's at either at casefilesgraphicnovel.com, casefilesgraphicnovel.com. But you'll see that on our Cold Case Christianity website, coldcasechristianity.com, that top banner is probably going to be Case Files for a year. So you can hit that top banner. It's going to take you right to the landing page. And what's more important than anything else is, remember, there's a ton of other materials that come along with the book. On the inside cover, on the back, there's a QR code, takes you right to the digital download for Case Closed, which is our about 35-page pamphlet that makes the case for the resurrection. There's a 10.5-hour the 10.5-hour curriculum we talked about that is a cold case case making curriculum that we teach at seminaries. That's available for free. What we're trying to do is use this book as a gateway so you can help your friends who are interested, or they can find a way in themselves if they are seeking to know God better. And that's all available at our website.
Awesome. We will put both of those links here in the show notes. And as always, coldcasechristianity.com has all of J. Warner Wallace's other books on there as well, and tons of great videos, just tons of great video clips that will absolutely sharpen you in your faith and in your ability to represent Christ to others too. So, all right, I'll give you guys parting shots here. Last comments, Jimmy.
Hey, just thanks so much for having us. We, if you don't like one of the three things I mentioned, just take pity on us. Still check it out. Maybe you'll like it.
Yeah, still read it, and maybe you'll find a fourth category. You'll be like, hey, I'm none of those three, but I'm this, and I love the book.
Yeah, you can tell us how we
exactly.
suck, basically. Do that. How's that? That would actually be worth doing. Okay, good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you guys so much. This has been a blast. It's been a different topic, which makes it interesting too, right? This is not just another book. I think one of the things that Jim said before we were recording was, a lot of books are all words with a few pictures, right? And this one is all pictures with a few words. And I thought that was just a neat way to think about it. And as I was looking through it, it felt like I was reading a movie, right? It's kind of like holding a movie in your hand. It's like reading along with a movie. So I'm just excited to read it myself and to hear other guys in Men's Alliance as they begin reading it and getting their opinion, because I think what we've got here is something that's going to appeal to men who are non-readers. If you think you're not a reader, I think you're going to be surprised when you pick up a graphic novel. So, Jay, Jimmy, thank you guys so much. This has been a great opportunity to chat with you guys once again.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate you.
To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.